Hey guys, before we jump into the video, I just wanted to let you guys know that I have now started a Patreon. Unfortunately, my job was a part of the bunch that got affected by COVID as well as the new shutdowns, and making models and videos is at times costly, so if you guys enjoy my content and want to see more of it, consider checking it out. As of now, we have 2 tiers set up, the first one being a supporter tier, which will give you access into exclusive content that I won't be posting on Instagram or YouTube. For example, exclusive updates, video updates, and other content, that tier being $5. And the second tier being behind the scenes, where you can gain access to exclusive behind the scenes model work, images, and early access to videos and reveals, and other content exclusively for patrons, that being $10. I'll be posting to both tiers frequently and as work progresses, so again, thank you guys for the continued support, and if you want to see more of what I do, consider checking that out. Thomas and the Magic Railroad was, for me, the beginning. I was only a couple months old when my mom got me the VHS tape of it, and I was instantly hooked into a reality of quirky, funny situations and talking trains. This movie was always something I appreciated, even when watching the show and seeing the tremendous differences and such. I may be biased, but there was a lot to fall in love with in this movie, which is what shocks me when finding out that this movie didn't perform all that well in the box office, and by a large portion of the Thomas fan base is looked down upon. Now, there's not even a proper confirmation that Thomas and the Magic Railroad is canon, and that alone is what causes most people to throw it out and cast it aside as just another Thomas media that flopped. But not having this as canon is, in my opinion, a tremendous loss, and the direction in which it was pushing Thomas was something that I think should be more appreciated. My first point for this goes into the overall tone that the movie carried. The movie maintained itself as the standard happy-go-lucky island that we all were used to, while also maintaining situations that were significantly heavier than what we were accustomed to. I mean, just look at Diesel 10. It was arguably the first time that we had a real villain character. He was, as I've said before, truly intimidating in nature, and he served that well. Well, he used to. At times he provided comic relief while overall carrying this aura of evil. He was trying to literally end the world though, so I mean he better. But not even just in Diesel 10. The entire gold dust situation itself is one that I would argue is significantly deeper than anything that we had seen before. Though it's just a dream, we see the real conundrum of Mr. C not having his signature gold dust play out in a truly worst case scenario, and while this may not be what happens, it definitely sets the tone for how serious the situation is. And that altogether was a first for Thomas. We never had a situation before this where Thomas's entire existence was on the line, and I applaud this movie for being able to hold these situations while also subduing them to fit into a younger audience. It's this part of things that I would argue makes it easier as adults to watch, as it's these situations we're able to recognize and now appreciate. When I was a kid, it was just, wow, Diesel 10 spooky. Now I can appreciate what it is about him that actually made him that way, and it's also one of the reasons I find it so offensive that they did this to him. Second would go to the characters in which we had introduced in this movie. Lady, Mr. C, Junior, Splatter, Dodge, literally everyone loved Mutt. Even P.T. Boomer, who didn't even make it into the final movie, all ended up in their own ways being fan favorite characters. Of course, there were characters that everyone wasn't the biggest fan of. For example, I personally found when the movie would cut to Lily and her situations prior to showing up at Shining Time quite annoying, and I'd find myself just fast forwarding to the engines again. Not to bash the character, it just wasn't what I and what most people cared about in this movie. There were also a lot of characters that I felt could have had more relevancy. For example, Billy and most of the Shining Time crew, as it stressed how serious Mr. C not being able to be there with his gold dust and magic is to the railroad, not just Sodor and for how he gets there. And while the dream was a tremendous scene, one of the best I would argue in the movie, why did it only have to be one scene? Like, did we really need the musical shit? Like, when we have this going on, couldn't we have just thrown a little bit more of that in there? But past that, I would argue that some of the characters that were introduced would end up being some of the best. Diesel 10, even now, is considered the main bad guy in the Thomas continuity. Kinda. And while we haven't seen anything of Splatter and Dodge, Mr. C, we did see a clip of Lady in a dream Thomas had, which makes me believe more than anything that this movie has to be canon, but even now, these characters remain relevant to fans, and that's something that most Thomas movies can't say when they introduce a new character. Like, does anyone really care about Hurricane and Frankie, Merlin? Maybe Hero, but they actually did stuff with him. He doesn't count. Point being, you didn't really get that from other Thomas movies. This one not only offered you new and lovable characters, but memorable situations that they're then placed into, and that's what sets them apart in my eyes. I mean, yeah, you could argue that bringing in famous actors like Alec Baldwin to play Mr. C was strange and at times seemed kinda selloutish, but the show was originally narrated by Ringo fucking Starr. This was not something that was new to Thomas. That, and in my opinion, Alec Baldwin fucking nailed the role. I'm sorry. Like every Thomas movie, there's definitely things to pick apart. This movie wasn't necessarily perfect, but I would argue in terms of what fans want from Thomas now, and for what most people appreciated about Thomas then, this movie kinda nailed it, which is why it doesn't really make sense to me that it doesn't get the appreciation or recognition that it deserves. It would be wrong for me to say that this movie doesn't get any appreciation. Just recently, an entire parody of the movie was made by members of the Thomas fandom that was not only amazing, but rivaled the original story and storytelling. So clearly the movie isn't necessarily ignored, but there still is a large part of the fan base that completely disregards this movie and what happens in it. Not only that, but at a time the movie was considered a massive failure. People argued that the direction it was going just wasn't for Thomas, and that the situations that the movie held just didn't feel fitting. However, my rebuttal to that is, until recently, when was Thomas afraid to get deep with its audience? That was one of the reasons it was so polarizing and stuck to so many people. That's one of the things that nowadays the show really doesn't care about, and that really shows. So you'd think that one of their attempts to get it right, amazingly being their first one, would get a little bit more credit. The things that we love and appreciate about classic Thomas were exemplified in this movie in ways that, let's be honest, we probably won't ever see again. So personally, Thomas and the Magic Railroad will always have that special place in me as being what started it all for me, but for the fandom, I think it should stand more as a pillar. A pillar of what once was, and as an example of what Thomas did right. And honestly, I think in these trying times, it's really, we need that. In fact, at this point, we just need to hit the reset button. Tactical news. We will right what we have wrong!